Christmas should have been warm. It should have smelled of pine and cinnamon, of turkey carved at the head of the table, of laughter that carried through the halls. But that Christmas the air felt sharp. My hands trembled as I placed my coat on the rack and stepped into my own dining room, where my children and their families were already gathered. The table was set beautifully, gleaming china, crystal glasses catching the glow of the chandelier. Candles flickered beside bowls of stuffing and roasted vegetables. Laughter flowed easily from one side of the table, though none of it seemed to reach me. "Dad's here," my son-in-law announced, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear, but thin with mock politeness. "About time," my daughter muttered, sliding her phone back into her purse. I pulled out a chair at the far end, the one nearest the window where Margaret and I used to sit together when she was alive. My wife had loved Christmas. She'd set the table days in advance, humming carols as she polished silver. Her absence was a wound that never closed, but I carried it quietly. Tonight, that wound felt like it was bleeding again. Plates were filled around me, generous portions of turkey potatoes, cranberries, forks clattered, glasses clinked, voices overlapped in cheer. When the platter reached my end, it was nearly bare. I waited patiently, as I always had, but when I finally reached for a slice of turkey, all that remained were scraps, bones polished clean. I glanced around the table, expecting someone to notice, to offer their portion, to carve more from the kitchen. But no one moved. My plate stayed empty. A laugh broke the silence, sharp, quick, and cutting. My son Jason raised his glass. "Guess Dad's on a diet this year," he said, smirking. The table erupted. Chuckles, snorts, even a hand slapping the wood. My daughter-in-law leaned toward her sister and whispered something that made them both burst out in giggles. Heat rushed to my face. I tried to smile, tried to keep my composure, but my hands tightened against the edge of the table. I looked down at the empty plate before me, white porcelain, spotless, reflecting the flicker of candlelight like it was mocking me too. Jason poured himself another glass of wine, still grinning. "He'll manage. Old folks don't eat much anyway." The words stung sharper than the laughter, not because of hunger. I'd eaten many meals alone, many suppers simple and plain. No, it was the message behind it. You don't matter. You're a shadow in your own house. A burden. I forced my voice steady. "I'm fine," I said softly. "Don't fuss." They didn't fuss. They didn't even hear me. Conversation swelled again. Talk of vacations, promotions, bonuses, new cars. I sat quietly, hands folded in my lap, the hunger in my stomach drowned by the ache in my chest. Across the room, the Christmas tree twinkled. Ornaments Margaret had chosen years ago still, hanging. A wooden angel Jason had carved in 3rd grade dangled crookedly near the top. Memories pressed in heavy, reminding me of nights when family had meant something real. I looked down once more at the plate. Empty, deliberately so. When the meal ended, I excused myself early, slipping away while the others were still laughing in the living room. No one stopped me. No one noticed. Back in my room, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the quiet shadows. Margaret's photograph rested on the nightstand, her smile caught forever in a frame of oak. I whispered into the stillness, "You wouldn't have let this happen, love." And though no voice answered, I felt something stir within me. They had served me last. They had laughed at my hunger. They had made me invisible in the home I had built with my own hands. But invisibility has its own strength. I folded my hands, steadied my breath, and made a promise in the silence. Next Christmas would not belong to them, and the locks on this house would tell them so. That night, long after the others had gone quiet upstairs, I sat alone in the living room. The faint glow from the Christmas tree washed across the walls, casting long shadows that seemed to shift like silent ghosts. The ornaments clinked gently, stirred by the heat from the old furnace. For a moment, I could almost believe Margaret was in the kitchen again, humming carols as she rolled out pie crusts. I leaned back in the armchair, the same one that had molded to my frame over the years, and let memory pull me under. I saw Margaret as clearly as if she stood before me, her hair tied back with ribbon, flour dusting her cheek as she laughed at my clumsy attempt to hang a star too high on the tree. She would step in, adjust it, then kiss me on the cheek, muttering, "You do the heavy lifting, Howard. I'll make it look right." Back then, the house was alive. Jason and his sister would run through the hallways with tinsel dragging behind them, their small feet pattering against the wood floors. Margaret would chase them, threatening to take the decorations away, only to end up laughing louder than they did. We hadn't had much money, but we had enough. Enough to keep the heat on, enough to put shoes on their feet, enough to build a home brick by brick. And behind it all were sacrifices, mine and Margaret's. The ledger kept track of it, though I didn't need the ink to remind me. I remembered every year. The winter of 1983, when the furnace failed and we huddled under blankets, with only a small electric heater for warmth. Jason was 7 then, shivering in his pajamas, and I walked 5 miles through snow the next morning to buy the part to fix it myself. We didn't have money for a repairman, but we made it work. We always made it work. I remembered 1985, when Jason begged us to take him to the ocean. Instead, Margaret and I spent our vacation money on new roof shingles. She promised him, "Next year, sweetheart." Next year never came, but the roof never leaked again. Each memory cut deeper now, not because of the sacrifices themselves, but because of how little they seemed to mean to my children. Last night at the dinner table, when Jason raised his glass and mocked me, when the plate before me stayed empty, I realized he had forgotten all of it. Forgotten the nights I came home with hands raw from the plant, the bills I paid late but paid nonetheless, the dreams Margaret and I shelved so they could have more. The word burden echoed in my head, sharper than any insult. I had heard it whispered. They thought of me as dead weight, as someone taking up space until they decided how to use the house. But Margaret would never have let me sink under the weight of those words. I heard her in my mind, even now, firm and steady as she had been in life. Respect isn't bought, Howard. It's earned in the quiet ways, and it lasts longer than cruelty. I pressed my palms together, breathing slow. She was right. Shouting at them, confronting them at the table, would have only fed their mockery. Dignity isn't loud. Dignity waits. I rose from the chair and walked to the mantel where her photograph stood. Her eyes, bright with determination even then, seemed to meet mine. "They think I'm weak," I whispered. "They think I'm finished. But they don't know me. They don't know what we built." The tree lights blinked, their glow soft against the walls. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with her presence, steady and sure. I returned to the armchair, shoulders squared. They could laugh. They could plot. They could whisper about nursing homes and ownership. But I wasn't finished, and when the time came, they would remember who Howard truly was. The morning after Christmas, the house felt heavy with the echoes of last night. I moved quietly, gathering crumpled wrapping paper from the floor and empty wine bottles from the counters. My children slept late upstairs, leaving the cleanup, as always, to me. By mid-morning, I stepped outside with a bag of trash. Frost crunched beneath my boots, the cold air sharp against my face. As I tipped the bin lid open, voices drifted through the half-cracked kitchen window. Jason's voice came first, sharp even when hushed. "He's getting worse. Did you see him just sit there last night? Didn't even complain when everyone laughed at him. Old and useless." The words hit harder than the winter wind. Then my daughter's voice followed, low but steady. "We can't keep this up, Jason. He's too much of a burden. Always hanging around, always acting like this house is still his. Maybe it's time we put him somewhere easier." My chest tightened. Somewhere easier. I didn't need them to finish the thought. They weren't talking about my bedroom down the hall. They were talking about a home, an institution, a place to put me away like forgotten furniture. The clink of a coffee mug. Then my daughter-in-law's voice joined in. "And once he's settled, this house won't go to waste. We could finally renovate, make it ours. Soft laughter followed, private and cruel. I gripped the edge of the trash bin so hard my knuckles whitened. For a moment, I wanted to storm back inside, to slam my fist on the table and remind them whose name was written on the deed. Remind them who had hammered these beams into place, who had worked double shifts to pay for every brick. But then Margaret's voice rose in my memory, calm and steady as it had always been. Don't fight fire with fire, Howard. Let their arrogance lean too far. When it falls, you'll be standing. I let the bin lid fall shut and walked slowly back to the yard. Each step felt heavier, but not from weakness, from resolve. Inside, their voices softened into casual chatter again, safe in the belief that I hadn't heard, that I was too old, too slow, too far gone to notice. But I had noticed. I had heard every word. I stopped at the edge of the yard and looked back at the house. The shingles I had nailed, the porch boards I had mended, the walls I had painted with Margaret by my side, all of it carried my mark. And yet my own children plotted to erase me from it, to call me a burden in the home that existed because of me. I whispered into the cold air, burden. That's what they see when they look at me. Not the years, not the work, just a burden. The word burned, but it also lit a spark. They could call me what they liked. They could whisper about homes and renovations. But they had forgotten the truth. I wasn't a burden. I was the foundation. And soon I would remind them. That night, long after the children had gone upstairs, the house lay still. I walked from room to room, switching off lights they had carelessly left burning, picking up their dirty glasses and plates. The same people who mocked me as useless left behind trails of mess I still cleaned. In the hallway, I paused at the row of picture frames. Dust had settled on most, some crooked from careless hands brushing past. One caught me, a photo of Margaret, taken during our very first Christmas here. She stood beside a half-decorated tree, hair tied back with ribbon, her smile wide and unguarded. I carried the frame into the living room and set it on the mantel. Then I lowered myself into the armchair and pressed my head into my palms. The words from the kitchen that morning replayed like a cruel echo. He's too much of a burden. Put him somewhere easier. This house could be ours. For a moment, anger welled hot and sharp, but then, like it always did, her voice returned. Not in the air, but inside me. Calm, firm, steady. Don't let them see you weak, Howard. Dignity isn't about shouting. It's about standing steady when others fall. I closed my eyes and breathed, letting her words anchor me. I remembered the winter she carried, laundry up the stairs even when her heart condition had begun to slow her down, refusing to let me shoulder everything alone. I remembered the way she whispered the night we paid the mortgage in full. We built this with our hands. No one can take it unless you hand it to them. The ache in my chest softened, replaced by something stronger. Resolve. They think I'm fading, I murmured to her photograph. They think they can laugh me into silence, push me into some home. But you knew me better than anyone. You knew I was never dead weight. Tell me, love, what would you have me do? The room was silent, but I swear I felt her presence, as though her hand rested gently on my shoulder. In that silence, her words were clear. Don't push what's already leaning, Howard. When it falls, be ready. I opened my eyes. The Christmas lights blinked on the tree, steady and patient. I rose from the chair and looked around the house Margaret and I had built, paid for, lived in, filled with sacrifices they would never understand. They could laugh, they could whisper, they could call me a burden, but Margaret had left me something greater than walls and beams. She had left me wisdom, patience, dignity, and with those I would wait. When the time came, I would be ready. The next morning I rose before the rest of the house. The winter light crept pale through the curtains as I brewed a pot of coffee and sat down at the kitchen table. On the chair beside me lay the old brown ledger, its cover cracked, corners softened, pages yellowed with time. Margaret had always said it wasn't just a book. It was the record of our lives. I pulled it close, brushed the dust from the spine, and opened to the first page. 1979, first mortgage payment, paid with overtime wages. I could see it clear as yesterday. My hands blistered from the steel plant. Margaret waiting at the kitchen door with a plate of stew, and that smile that made even exhaustion bearable. We had celebrated that first payment as though we had struck gold. 1985, furnace repair, $450. Vacation postponed. Jason had been 7 then, begging to see the ocean. I remembered the way Margaret promised him next year, while we scraped the money together to keep the house warm. Next year never came, but the furnace never failed us again. 1992, mortgage paid in full. The ink on that line was darker, as though Margaret pressed the pen harder, her joy spilling into the page. That night we drank coffee instead of champagne, sitting right here at this table, laughing until our sides hurt. We had owned the house outright. I turned the pages slowly. New shingles bought with savings, gutters replaced with my own hands, siding painted by Margaret while I held the ladder steady. Every line wasn't just an expense, it was a piece of us. Sacrifice after sacrifice, proof that this home had never been given, it had been built. Jason thought of me as a burden now, waiting for me to die so he could claim what he believed was his. He didn't see the ledger, he didn't see the years pressed into every figure, every dollar, every late-night decision to do without so he could have more. I laid the ledger flat and went to the drawer where I kept important papers. Out came the property tax receipts, each stamped paid. The insurance policy Margaret had insisted on renewing every year. And finally, the deed, my name printed clear across the top. I spread them across the table, the morning sun catching their edges. This was no burden. This was proof. For a long moment, I sat staring at them, hearing the echoes of Christmas laughter, of whispered plans to put me away. The word burden rattled in my ears again, but this time it did not sting. It hardened. It focused. I placed my hand firmly on the ledger's worn cover. "You built this with me, Margaret," I whispered. "Every sacrifice is written here, and I'll be damned if they erase us." The papers on the table looked less like old documents now and more like weapons, silent, undeniable weapons. They had laughed at me, left my plate empty, whispered about taking my home. But my name was here, in ink, in law, in history, and soon they would see it too. Later that week, I drove my old pickup through town, its heater rattling like a tired drum, but still keeping the cab warm. As I turned onto Maple Avenue, I slowed near Jason's driveway. Parked there was a brand new SUV, paint so black that reflected the pale winter sun. The dealer's tag still dangled on the plate. Right beside it sat his wife's luxury sedan, polished to a mirror shine. I let the truck idle for a moment, staring. 2 new cars in less than a year. Jason always wanted shine more than substance, but even for him, this was reckless. The following day, I stopped at Henderson's Cafe. Ruth, who had been pouring coffee and collecting stories in this town for as long as I could remember, leaned over the counter as she filled my cup. "Howard," she whispered, "you might want to keep an ear out. Folks say the bank's been calling your boy." I stirred my coffee. "Calling about what?" She shook her head. "Payments, late on the mortgage. Car loans, too. Man's living like bills are optional." I nodded slowly, not surprised, but still unsettled. Jason had always craved admiration, but admiration paid on credit is nothing but a house of cards. That evening I walked my own yard, frost crunching beneath my boots. The fence I had built decades ago still stood firm, every board hammered by my own hand. Across the street, Jason's porch railings sagged, the gutters stuffed with leaves. His cars gleamed like trophies, but the bones of his life were already cracking. A few days later, I heard more. A neighbor mentioned seeing a repossession truck idling near Jason's street. Someone else said his wife complained about tight money at the salon, all while scheduling another vacation. Even Linda at the general store told me she'd seen Jason write a check that bounced. Every whisper painted the same picture. Jason's life was leaning, hollow behind its shine. That night, I sat again at the kitchen table. Margaret's ledger opened before me. My eyes lingered on the line that read 1992. Mortgage paid in full. My name and hers had carried this house through storms, layoffs, sickness. We had chosen sacrifice over spectacle. Jason had chosen spectacle over sacrifice, and now he was drowning. I closed the ledger and set my palm on its cover. Margaret's words stirred in my memory, calm as ever. Don't push what's already leaning, Howard. Just be ready when it falls. Jason thought I was weak, invisible, finished, but the truth was turning against him. His arrogance was pulling him under one bill at a time. I didn't need to push. I just needed to wait. And when the collapse came, I would be ready. The next Monday, I put on my brown corduroy jacket, the same one Margaret used to press for me on Sundays, and drove into town. The sky hung low with heavy gray clouds, the kind that threatened snow but never followed through. My truck rattled to a stop in front of a narrow brick building I'd known for decades. The brass plate by the door read, Samuel Whitaker, attorney at law. Sam and I went back years. He'd been the young lawyer who showed up at the plant's union meetings back when I was still pulling 12-hour shifts. He'd talk straight, no fancy words, and earn the respect of men who distrusted suits. Now his hair had thinned, his suits were sharper, but his handshake was the same. Firm, honest. Inside, the office smelled of paper and leather polish. Sam looked up from his desk and grinned. Well, if it isn't Howard Hale, 70 and still walking straighter than half the men my age. What brings you in? I sat down slowly, placing Margaret's ledger and a thick folder of papers on his desk. I need clarity, Sam, about the house. He opened the folder, leafing through property tax receipts, insurance slips, and finally, the deed. He whistled softly. You've kept better records than most men. Everything's in your name. Paid, current, airtight. I nodded. That's what I thought. But my son's been reckless. He's got debts. Cars, vacations, mortgages stacked on mortgages. I don't want his mess pulling this house down with him. Sam leaned back, steepling his fingers. It can't touch you, Howard. Not unless you signed it away. And you haven't. The deed is yours outright. In fact, you could sell or transfer it tomorrow if you wanted. No one could stop you. I let the words sink in. Jason thought of me as temporary, a caretaker in my own home. But Sam had just confirmed the truth. The law stood on my side. Suppose, I said carefully, a man wanted to make sure no one could claim his work once he's gone. Suppose he wanted to guarantee that the house doesn't fall into hands that would squander it. Sam's eyes sharpened. Then that man would act now. He'd set up a trust, or sell outright, or move things where greedy fingers can't reach. It's about foresight, Howard. Control. I tapped the ledger with one finger. Margaret and I built this house nail by nail. I won't let it become a prize for arrogance. Sam studied me for a long moment, then nodded. Then we'll draw up options, quietly. You don't need to announce anything until you're ready. But make no mistake, you're the one in control here, not Jason, not anyone else. When I left his office, the clouds had shifted, letting a thin blade of sunlight cut through. I tucked the papers under my arm and walked steady to the truck. Jason thought my silence meant surrender, but now I knew better. Silence meant preparation, and with the law on my side, I was no longer waiting helplessly. I was waiting with purpose. 2 days after meeting with Sam Whitaker, I found myself driving down Main Street toward the bank. The old brick building had stood there longer than most of us in town, its clock tower chiming noon as I pulled into the lot. I had walked through those doors countless times, back when Margaret and I scraped together our first down payment, back when we celebrated the last mortgage check cleared. Today, though, I wasn't there to celebrate. I was there to listen. Inside, the place smelled of polished wood and ink. The air hushed the way only banks can be. Behind the counter, I spotted Martha Ellison, a familiar face who'd started it as a young teller and now wore a manager's badge pinned neatly to her blazer. Her hair had grayed, her glasses gave her a sharp look, but her smile softened when she saw me. "Howard Hale," she said warmly, shaking my hand. "Haven't seen you in a while. What brings you in today?" I leaned on the counter, lowering my voice. "I need a word, Martha," quietly. Her brows lifted, but she nodded. "Of course. Come on back." She led me into her office, closing the door behind us. Papers were stacked neatly on her desk, a lamp glowing softly beside a bowl of peppermint candies. She sat, pen poised over a yellow pad. "All right, Howard, what's on your mind?" I set the ledger on her desk, but didn't open it. "It's about Jason. I've been hearing things. Cars bought on loans, bills unpaid, creditors circling. I don't want gossip. I need to know if there's truth to it, and if it could affect me." Martha sighed, setting her pen down. "Howard, you know I can't disclose another customer's details. But—" She leaned back, studying me for a moment. "I can tell you this much. His accounts are troubled. Mortgage behind. Car loan flagged. Credit cards maxed. We've had calls about liens. He's juggling bills, and he's running out of hands." The words landed heavy, but not surprising. Jason's appetite for shine had always been greater than his pocket. Martha's voice softened. "Howard, I'll be blunt. If he keeps this up, the bank won't have a choice. There'll be notices, maybe even foreclosure. And when that happens, it'll be public." I nodded slowly. "And if it comes to that?" She tapped her pen against the pad, then looked me straight in the eye. "Then someone with steady funds and a clean record could step in at auction. Someone who knows what they're doing. A man like you." Her words struck like a hammer. Sam had shown me the law was on my side. Martha was showing me Jason's world was already cracking. Together they revealed a truth Jason refused to see. His arrogance was digging his grave, and all I had to do was stand steady when the dirt gave way. I rose, shaking her hand firmly. "Thank you, Martha. You've given me more than enough." On my way out, I paused by the bulletin board in the lobby. Notices for estate sales and foreclosures fluttered on the cork, names typed neatly in black ink. Jason's wasn't there yet, but it would be. Outside, the air felt sharper, cleaner. I walked back to my truck with Margaret's ledger tucked under my arm. Jason thought I was fading into the background. Too old to matter. But the truth was simple. I was patient. I had built a life on patience, and patience paired with preparation was stronger than any arrogance. As I started the engine, Margaret's voice drifted back into my mind. "Don't push what's already leaning, Howard. Just wait." I gripped the wheel and whispered, "I'm waiting, love, and I'll be ready." After leaving the bank, I knew what needed to be done. Jason's downfall wasn't a question of if, it was a matter of when. And when that moment came, I intended to be ready. That evening, I cleared the kitchen table and set down everything I had gathered so far. Margaret's ledger, the deed, tax receipts, insurance policies, and a folder Sam Whitaker had given me with legal options neatly outlined. I laid each document in a row, like tools on a workbench. For decades, I'd fixed things with my hands. Furnaces, fences, leaky roofs. This was no different. The tools were just paper and ink now. I began writing lists in a notebook. List 1. Allies. Ruth Collins, the best dispatcher I'd ever known, still sharp as glass. Luis, an old friend from the plant who now ran a small hauling company. Martha at the bank, who'd already given me more truth than rules allowed. List 2. Rules. No loans, no shortcuts. No words spoken in anger. Each line steadied me. Jason thrived on flash. I would rely on foundation. Over the next week, I began making quiet visits. At Henderson's Cafe, I found Ruth sipping coffee and marking schedules. I slid into the booth across from her. "If I called you tomorrow," I asked, "would you take that call?" She looked at me over her glasses. "Howard, you kept me employed during strikes and slowdowns. If you call, I'll answer." Luis was the same. I caught him at his yard, elbow deep in an engine. When I hinted at changes coming, he wiped his hands and grinned. "If you're back in charge, I'm in. I'm tired of men who think debt is leadership." At the bank, Martha discreetly helped me consolidate my accounts. We moved certificates of deposit, prepared cashier's checks that could be ready at a moment's notice, and opened a safe deposit box where I placed duplicates of every important paper. If Jason ever tried to claim confusion or incapacity, I would have proof, ready, signed, and sealed. Each step made the silence in my home feel different. It wasn't hollow anymore. It was charged, like a current humming beneath the floorboards. Jason kept laughing at parties and buying things he couldn't afford. Meanwhile, I was preparing piece by piece, quiet and deliberate. At night, I'd sit by Margaret's photograph and read lines from the ledger out loud. One evening, my voice cracked as I read, 1985, furnace repair. Vacation postponed. I looked at her photo and whispered, "We made the right choice, love. Sacrifice built this home, not arrogance." By the end of that week, I had everything in place. Documents sorted, allies lined up, money ready, legal paths cleared. All I had to do was wait for Jason's hollow walls to collapse, and collapse they would. Jason thought silence meant weakness. He thought I was invisible, fading, a burden. But silence, I had come to understand, was the sharpest preparation of all. The envelope arrived on a frosted Thursday morning, thin, official, stamped with the county seal. I slid it open with my pocket knife, my hands steady even as my heart thudded. Inside, typed in cold black ink, was confirmation. Foreclosure auction, Maple Drive property, Saturday, 11 a.m. Jason's name sat plain on the page. Not rumor, not whisper, truth. I set the letter on the kitchen table beside Margaret's ledger. For a long while I simply stared at it, the way a carpenter studies a beam before setting his chisel. Margaret's photograph on the mantel caught the winter light. Her eyes seemed to tell me what I already knew. "It's time, Howard. You've waited long enough." That Saturday I dressed with care. Not in work clothes, but in the navy blazer Margaret had insisted I buy for our niece's wedding. I polished my boots until the leather shone. The cashier's checks I'd prepared with Martha slipped into my inside pocket, heavy as iron. The courthouse conference room smelled of dust and stale coffee. Rows of folding chairs faced the clerk's table at the front. Around me sat small-time investors, scrapmen, curious locals. The clerk shuffled papers, droned through the rules. Certified funds only, payment due immediately, property sold as is. I took a seat near the back. My folder rested across my knees. Jason arrived 10 minutes late. His suit wrinkled, hair uncombed, eyes darting. He didn't carry a folder. He didn't sit. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching. He wasn't here to save his house. He was here to see if I would fail. The auction rolled through minor lots, old equipment, rental properties, liens. Bids rose and fell, gavels tapped. Strangers nodded to one another. I kept still, waiting. At last the clerk cleared his throat. "Next property, primary residence, Maple Drive." The room stirred. A few bidders flipped to pages in their notes, but none leaned forward. Family homes didn't turn profit the way warehouses did. Opening bid, 50,000. Silence. Then I raised my hand. 50? The clerk nodded. 50. Do I hear 60? A man in a flannel coat offered 60. I raised to 70. Another bidder lifted his card at 80, but I countered without hesitation. 90. 100. The numbers climbed, each one steadier than the last. My hand did not tremble. At 100,000, the flannel man shook his head. At 110, the other bidder dropped his card. 110,000, the clerk called. Any advance? The room was silent until Jason's voice cut through, loud and angry. This is ridiculous. That's my house. The clerk didn't look up. Sir, unless you have certified funds, you may not bid. All eyes turned to Jason. His face burned crimson, his fists clenched, but no words followed. The gavel came down with a hard crack. Sold. 110,000. To bidder number 12. My number. The air rushed from my lungs, slow and steady. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel glee. I felt something cleaner, justice settling into place, as final as the gavel's strike. The clerk handed me the paperwork. I signed where instructed, each letter of my name carving away Jason's laughter, Jason's whispers, Jason's arrogance. Across the room he watched me, disbelief etched deep into his face. He had mocked me for being old, invisible, a burden. But in front of strangers and law alike, the house he thought was his had slipped from his hands into mine, quietly, legally, permanently. I folded the deed, slid it into my pocket, and rose from my chair. The room murmured as I passed, but I heard only Margaret's voice. Hold your head high, Howard. Dignity can't be stolen. As I stepped out into the cold December air, Jason's glare burned into my back, but the keys to his fate jingled softly in my pocket. Not his anymore. Mine. Monday morning, I walked into the county courthouse with the folder tucked beneath my arm. The hallways smelled of floor polish and old paper, echoing faintly with footsteps. I had been here before, for taxes, for permits, but this time was different. This time I wasn't here with worry. I was here with certainty. The clerk at the counter recognized me from the auction and slid a fresh stack of documents across the desk. Mr. Hale, just sign. Where indicated. Once recorded, the title is yours alone. I removed my glasses, set them on the desk, and read carefully. Transfer of ownership, certificate of sale, title recording. Jason's name appeared again and again, crossed out, replaced by the empty lines awaiting mine. I picked up the pen. Each stroke was deliberate, firm. My name, Howard Hale, spread across the pages like a steady hand closing a chapter. I signed as though I were hammering the last nail into a frame I had built with my own sweat. With every signature, I felt the sting of Christmas night fade, replaced by a calm that only truth could give. The clerk stamped the final page with a heavy red seal. Thud. The sound was louder than any toast Jason had ever raised. He slid the deed toward me, embossed and official. Congratulations, Mr. Hale. It's done. You are the sole owner. I picked up the paper, holding it with both hands. It looked thin, ordinary, but in its weight was every sacrifice Margaret and I had made. Every overtime shift, every postponed vacation, every bill juggled until the last dollar stretched. As I stepped outside, the winter air slapped cold against my face. On the courthouse steps, leaning against a stone pillar, was Jason. His tie hung loose, his eyes bloodshot, his jaw set tight. He didn't greet me. He didn't smile. You think this is funny? He barked as I approached. That was my house. I stopped 2 steps above him, the deed tucked neatly under my arm. I looked him straight in the eye. No, Jason, it was never yours. You gambled with what you couldn't pay for. I just picked up what you threw away. His fists curled, his body tense as if he might lunge, but his eyes flicked to the paper in my hands, the seal, the stamp, the undeniable truth. His shoulders sagged under the weight of it. Pride makes men shout. Proof makes them silent. I stepped past him slowly, boots steady on the stone steps. At the bottom I paused, turned slightly, and spoke in a voice calm as the winter wind. You laughed when my plate was empty. You whispered that I was a burden. Remember this, Jason. The law doesn't laugh, and sacrifice doesn't forget. He said nothing. His face twisted, but no words came. I walked on, climbed into my old truck, and set the deed carefully beside Margaret's photograph I always carried. As the engine rumbled to life, I whispered, "We did it, love. They'll never erase us now." The courthouse shrank in my rearview mirror. The weight of humiliation was gone. What remained was dignity, signed and sealed. 2 mornings after the papers were signed, I drove slowly down Maple Drive. The air was crisp, white frost glittering on rooftops, the streets quiet under a pale sun. My truck rattled to a stop in front of the house Jason once bragged about, as if he had built it himself. Now it was mine again, in law and in truth. I stepped out and walked the path up to the door. The keys the clerk had handed me felt cool and heavy in my palm. I turned them slowly in the lock. The door creaked open, and the scent of stale wine and perfume hit me at once. The entryway was cluttered, discarded shoes, unopened bills, wrapping paper still strewn across the floor from Christmas. I stepped inside, boots echoing on hardwood I remembered laying down with Margaret all those years ago. The home I had built was still here, though buried under neglect and arrogance. I passed through the living room. This was the same spot where Jason had stood on Christmas night, raising a glass, mocking me as too old, while everyone laughed. I looked at the spot on the rug where my chair had sat, a lonely perch with an empty plate before me. The laughter echoed faintly in my memory, but the house was silent now. In the kitchen, the sink overflowed with dirty dishes, crusted food clinging to the edges. On the counter, envelopes stamped final notice and delinquent payment lay unopened. Jason had been too proud to ask for help, too arrogant to admit his failures. His debts were carved into these papers, a silent record of collapse. I moved down the hallway, fingers brushing the walls Margaret had painted herself. Jason's childhood room came into view, posters long gone but the memories vivid. I could still see him as a boy, handing me nails when I fixed the roof, asking if one day he'd be strong like me. My throat tightened. That boy had vanished, swallowed by pride and greed. At the back of the house was Jason's study. I opened the door. A leather chair sat in the corner like a throne, its seams cracked, surrounded by piles of unpaid bills and glossy brochures for vacations that would never happen. I walked across the room and lowered myself into the chair. It groaned under my weight, but it held. For a moment, I simply sat there, the silence filling me. Jason had tried to erase me, to push me into a corner, to mock me until I believed I was nothing. But here I was, seated at the very heart of what he thought was his domain. Not as a guest, not as a burden, as the rightful owner. The front door banged open suddenly. Jason's voice rang through the house, angry, strained. "Dad, you can't just come in here." I turned slowly in the chair as he stormed down the hallway. His tie was crooked, his face red, his eyes wild. He froze when he saw me sitting at his desk. "This isn't your place anymore," I said quietly, holding the deed up between 2 fingers. "It's mine. Legally. Permanently. Every seal, every stamp says so." His mouth opened, but no words came. His fists clenched, then loosened. He saw the truth in that paper, and the fight drained from him. "You mocked me at Christmas," I continued, my voice steady. "You served me last. You left my plate empty. You called me useless. But look around you, Jason. Who's the one holding the keys? Who's the one holding the deed?" He dropped his gaze to the floor, shame flickering across his face. I stood, sliding the deed back into my coat. "You wanted me invisible. But today, Jason, it's you who doesn't belong in this house." I walked past him slowly, boots heavy on the floorboards. At the door, I paused and glanced back once more. "Remember this. A man who forgets the foundation he stands on will always fall." I stepped outside, the winter air sharp and clean. The keys jingled in my pocket, no longer a burden, but a promise fulfilled. 3 nights later, a hard knock rattled my front door. It wasn't polite. It was the kind of pounding meant to startle a man out of peace. I opened it to find Jason standing there, face pale and twisted, shirt wrinkled, eyes red-rimmed like he hadn't slept. "Dad!" he snapped. "We're talking!" "Now." I didn't answer. I stepped aside. He barged in, pacing the living room beneath Margaret's photograph on the mantel. He looked small under her gaze, though his voice tried to fill the room. "You stole my house," he spat. "Do you have any idea what you've done? My wife's family, my friends, everyone's talking about it. Do you know how humiliated I am?" I closed the door gently, my voice calm. "I didn't steal anything, Jason. You lost it. You gambled with debt and pride, and the law doesn't cover arrogance." His fists tightened. "Don't you dare act righteous. You planned this. Sat there smiling while I went under. You waited for me to fall so you could—" I cut him off, my tone firm but quiet. "No, Jason, I didn't wait for you to fall. I waited for the truth to show itself. And it did. Every unpaid bill, every late mortgage, every car you couldn't afford, that wasn't me. That was you." He stopped pacing, breathing hard. His eyes burned. "You think this makes you better than me?" I stepped closer, steady on my feet. "I don't need to be better than you. I just need to remember who I am. I am the man who worked double shifts so you could sleep under this roof. I am the man who patched leaks, paid bills, carried weight you never knew existed. And when you mocked me at Christmas, when you left my plate empty, you revealed the truth. Not that I was weak, but that you've been leaning on me your entire life." His mouth opened, but the words caught in his throat. His eyes flicked toward Margaret's picture, and for the first time in years, I saw shame flicker there. I let the silence stretch before I spoke again. "Respect isn't inherited, Jason. It's earned. You wanted the house without sacrifice, the keys without sweat. That's not how it works. And now the deed bears my name, not because I fought you for it, but because you let it slip through your hands." His shoulders slumped, pride sagging under the weight of truth. "So what now?" he muttered. "You kick me out? Throw me into the street?" I shook my head. "Number, I won't lower myself to what you did to me, but you will leave. This house won't carry your debts or your arrogance anymore. Find your own foundation." He stood frozen, then gave a single sharp nod, jaw clenched. Without another word, he turned and walked out. The door closed behind him with a hollow click. The house grew quiet again, Margaret's picture steady above the mantel. I lowered myself into the armchair, weary but calm. Jason had tried one last time to shout me down, to claw back dignity with anger. But dignity doesn't come from shouting. It comes from truth, and truth was mine. He had wanted me invisible. Instead, he was the one who walked away unseen. The morning after Jason stormed out of my house, I rose early and made myself a simple breakfast. 2 eggs, toast, black coffee. The plate before me wasn't empty this time. It was mine, filled because I filled it. No one could take that away again. I carried my mug to the living room and sat in the old armchair by the window. The winter sun spilled across the floorboards. Margaret and I had sanded decades ago, boards that had outlasted storms, arguments, and now even betrayal. On the mantel, her photograph caught the light. She looked as she always had, strong, steady, sure. I opened the ledger one more time. My finger traced across the line that read 1992. Mortgage paid in full. I remembered the night we wrote that entry, Margaret leaning over my shoulder, her laughter bubbling like music. That memory warmed me now, reminding me that dignity wasn't found in noise or cruelty. It was in sacrifice, quiet and unshakable. I thought back to Christmas dinner, the laughter at my empty plate, Jason's smug glass raised in mockery, the whispers of my children plotting to put me away. For a moment, their voices had stung like knives, but now they were gone, faded into echoes that no longer mattered. What endured was the foundation Margaret and I had built, the roof over my head, the deeds signed in my name, the quiet proof of a lifetime of work. Jason had lost his house, his pride, his false inheritance. I had lost something too, illusions. The illusion that blood always means loyalty, that children always honor their parents. It hurt, yes, but truth is better than illusions. Truth sets a man steady, even in winter. I raised my mug toward Margaret's photograph. We stood firm, love. They tried to erase us, but the foundation held. It always will. The coffee tasted richer than any wine Jason had ever poured at his table. Because it was mine. Because it was honest. I leaned back, letting the sun warm my face. My story wasn't one of shouting or fists, but of patience, of waiting for arrogance to topple itself. And when it did, I was ready. In the end, greed had destroyed itself. Mockery had withered into silence. And dignity, the kind that doesn't beg, doesn't break, doesn't fade, stood taller than any insult. That was my revenge. Quiet, complete, eternal. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments which city you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more stories of justice, dignity, and revenge.